You ever have one of those mornings where everything feels ordinary, and then in less time than it takes to pour coffee, your whole life? Reroutes. That was Daniel Hayes and Laura Kim's morning. They were dressed down, excited, a little ridiculous about packing 10-year anniversary cheap hotel in a crooked alley of a city they'd wanted to wander for years. Tapas and terrible Spanish and 0 emails for a weekend. Daniel, 46, used to grease elbows with big metal birds he'd worked his way up from wrenching on landing gear to inspecting whole fleets for the National Aviation Safety Board. Quiet kind of authority, not loud. Laura, 43, was the kind of brain people hired when they wanted to make rules that actually worked, Ph.D. in Human Factors, M.D. in Aerospace Medicine. She wrote the sleep and alertness rules pilots swear by. Two people who lived in the guts of safety policy now trying to drink sangria in peace. They checked in for Meridian Air Flight 902 at Larkfield Regional, changed the phones to Do Not Disturb, zipped a bag, joked about forgetting sunscreen. They had premium seats, aisle and window legroom that felt like a tiny prize after years of economy. They were humming, not thinking about work because sometimes for an hour or two you get to be just a person. Boarding started, people shuffled voices mixing like soup. Daniel and Laura handed their passes to the gate attendant and walked down the jet bridge together, smiling like people who knew how to be together. That's when it began, small, human, poisonous. A flight attendant greeted them at the door, a woman in her late 30s with a tidy bun and practiced cheer. Her name tag read Carmen Alvarez. Her smile landed flat when she looked at Daniel. Premium. Right this way, she said, but not the friendly way. The way someone says, speak up, when they mean stay in your lane. There was a twitch in her eyes that made Daniel feel the room tilt. Behind her, the cabin manager, a man named Greg Lawson, salt and pepper, 20 years on the road, started in with the script. We've had some system glitches today. Sometimes seats appear double booked. That line is a slow hand on your shoulder that says you don't belong. Greg's voice was syrupy polite, but the message was sharp. We think you're lying. Sir, can I see the card used to buy the tickets? Greg asked, loud enough that a few heads turned. A man across the aisle smiled indulgently like he'd seen a small inconvenience, and that was all it was. Daniel felt his jaw go flat. He's seen reservation systems read the error logs, knows how absurd that excuse is. He also knows the softer, darker truth. Sometimes the question isn't about systems, it's about who the people are. Laura kept her hands in her lap like a trained surgeon, methodical and calm. We paid for these months ago, she said. You can verify with customer service. She reached for her safety card, an old habit she finds comfort in the small rituals of flying. But the requests snowballed additional ID, the credit card proof of purchase. No one else in the cabin was asked. Someone muttered. Someone filmed with a little phone light. A passenger, a young woman named Maya Lopez who'd been waiting in row 11, pulled out her phone and hit record because she had a feeling. People who have been on the wrong side of an assumption learn to document. Greg's tone shifted from helpful to suspicious and then to accusing with the graceful cruelty of someone who has convinced himself he's doing the right thing. Sometimes people try to game the system, he said. We have to make sure premium seats were legitimately purchased. That's when Daniel felt it, the familiarity of being sized up, the tired muscle memory of responding without making it worse. He thought this could ruin the trip, or he could end it on the spot. He thought of the anniversary cake waiting at the hotel and of the thousands of maintenance logs he'd reviewed that kept people alive. He thought of Laura, steady and brilliant. He opened his wallet and pushed out a gold federal badge, plain and dull, the kind that makes people stop and check their notes. I'm a senior air carrier safety inspector, he said quietly. Laura put her credentials on the seat, Dr. Laura Kim, Aerospace Medicine. For a stretch of 3 seconds, the cabin became a theater where everybody could see the props and the actors dropped their masks. Greg went pale. Carmen's hands trembled. Greg tried to recoup with the old "we were only following protocol" line, but the sentences had been filmed, the faces had been seen. Maya's live stream hit the internet before the plane had cooled from the engines. Passengers shifted from curiosity to alarm to a kind of righteous anger. People who'd been about to scroll their feeds were suddenly witnesses, and witnesses are trouble for anyone who's been operating on prejudice. Captain Alan Reed stepped out of the cockpit to assess the situation. He took one look and made a choice. He chose to trust his crew over his passengers. He chose institutional reflex over human decency. That choice is what blew things up. Daniel, who could have argued and let it become ugly on his own, dialed a number no one in that cabin expected. He called his office at the safety board. "We have a federal situation," he said. That call mobilized people, not angry strangers, but investigators, supervisors, a machine that checks itself. Within half an hour, security officers, airline managers, and federal investigators were at Gate B-12. What began as presumptuous questions about tickets became a formal civil rights investigation. Carmen and Greg were taken aside for questioning. Their eyes filled in a way that told stories not of evil, but of trained assumptions of scripts taught in classrooms that never taught empathy. In the interrogation rooms, the paper trail told the real tale. Training slides that suggested look for discrepancies in premium passengers turned out to be flawed heuristics that targeted people who didn't fit an outdated image. Complaint logs revealed patterns, dozens of suspicious passenger reports over months, with a disproportionate number for passengers of color. Where the company had seen isolated glitches, investigators saw a pattern, and patterns become evidence. Maya's video became the pebble that started an avalanche. She shared the footage with reporters, with civil rights groups, with anyone who would look. The story moved fast. Social feeds, news tickers, a hashtag. Meridian Air's stock dipped, then dived. Boardroom conference calls became crisis strategy sessions, and the company had to answer for what it had let fester. The fallout was huge. Staff who'd thought they were enforcing order found themselves out of work, pensions in limbo, families shaken. Carmen, who'd followed scripts and liked the steadiness of routine, sat in a gray office and said, "I didn't mean to hurt anyone." Those words were true, and yet incomplete intent doesn't erase impact. Greg and Captain Reed watched their careers crumble. The crew's defense that they were protecting passengers looked paper-thin next to documented bias. But the story didn't stop at blame. Daniel and Laura could have sued for compensation, for apology, for reputations repaired with a check, and they did walk through the legal steps, but what they wanted was systemic change. They sat in meeting rooms for weeks with policymakers and airline execs and civil rights lawyers sketching out new guardrails so we thought they were suspicious script would never again be acceptable. They pushed for what eventually became the Hayes-Kim Protocol, a suite of reforms that required airlines to log every verification request, to audit for biased patterns, to retrain crews with human-centered scenarios, and to install a real-time reporting tool for passengers. It was bureaucratic and messy and painfully slow at times, but it made a difference. Other companies started looking inward, not because they felt like it, but because the public could see them, and seeing begets pressure. A year later, Daniel and Laura didn't have their broken morning back. You never do. But the result was a landscape nudged toward better. Complaint numbers for discriminatory treatment in transit dipped, training programs changed language that used to hide bias, and a handful of airlines adopted policies that forced crew members to think on paper before they judged on sight. Maya went on to work with a civil rights nonprofit, using her phone as a tool for accountability. Passengers who had once felt invisible told Daniel that the week after the reforms, a flight attendant actually apologized and treated them like any other human being. That's slow progress, but it's progress. This isn't a fairy tale where everything is neat. People lost jobs, families felt the strain, and a single mistake cost lives professionally and emotionally for some. But the bigger point is this. Systems teach behaviors, and behaviors teach systems. If you train people to judge before they gather facts, you will get judgment. If you create feedback loops that reward keeping the cabin safe without defining what safety actually looks like, you will get prejudice dressed as protocol. So where does that leave us? If you watch this and think, "Oh, that's sad," go a step further. Think about the small moments you walk past the clerk who assumes you can't afford something, the security guard who lingers on one person's ID, the manager who looks away. These aren't isolated acts, they are the stitches in a pattern. And patterns can be picked apart. I want to hear from you. Have you ever been on the receiving end of an assumption that changed your day? Did you stand up, or did someone else? Do you think reforms like the Hayes-Kim protocol go far enough, or are they just PR bandages? Drop your story in the comments. Be honest, be specific. Tell us what you think is fair, what feels like justice, and what still needs fixing. Hit, like if this made you think twice, subscribe for more true stories that matter. And if you have a video or a moment you recorded, share it because sometimes a phone in the right hands is the only thing between silence and change. Thanks for listening. Remember, dignity isn't reserved for certain seats. It's a baseline everyone deserves. You'll stand up next time. Tell me below.